Hello, everyone. How are you? We should have known we'd need a larger room. It is wonderful to see you all here. I am not who you are here to hear. We'll get right to him. I'm Bruno Carvalho. I'm the interim director of the Mahindra Humanities Center. I'll be introducing this event. I'll hold the mic. I'll ask some initial questions to get the conversation going. I had many questions prepared for this event, but judging by the energy and the buzz in the room, I think we'll be better off turning it over to the audience as early as possible. You know, as the days darken earlier and earlier here in Massachusetts land, we are brought together by bright prospects, the prospect of conversation with Michael Pollan, and the launch of a new program in the study of psychedelics in society and culture. This program is enabled by a visionary gift from the Gracias Family Foundation. It builds on ongoing initiatives here at Harvard, at the Center for the Study of World Religions at our Divinity School, and the Petrie Flom Center at the Law School. We hope the Mahindra Humanities Center will serve as a connector, a convener, a catalyst, a bridge builder across Harvard and beyond, including through partnerships that we are building with UC Berkeley's Center for the Science of Psychedelics and the Center for Interdisciplinary Critical Inquiry, where they are also launching a new collaborative initiative. This is a moment of transformative possibilities for the study of psychedelics. We owe thanks to everyone behind it. Antonio Gracias, Susie Clark, Robin Kelsey, Michael Pollan, Brian Murarescu, and many others. It is not often that we get to shape a well-resourced program from the ground up, and when I say we, I really mean it. Harvard affiliates and their collaborators will help to set the directions that this program takes as we work to foster an intellectual community in the years to come. So look out for a series of talks this spring, and soon we will issue an open call for proposals to support a variety of projects, including grants for programming, research, and fellowships. So more information forthcoming on those fronts. So, tune in. Tune in. Stay tuned. Most importantly, stay tuned. Back to the script. As we look towards the future, Harvard's history with psychedelics will surely come up. And we think of Timothy Leary and the counterculture, but there is much more. We should remember, for example, the ethnobotanist Richard Evans Schultes, who during his many decades at Harvard contributed to our understanding of the purposeful and structured use of hallucinogenic plants in indigenous societies of Mexico, the Amazon, and Oklahoma. That was the subject of his undergraduate thesis here at Harvard. And now we, of course, have Michael Pollan inspiring us to make new histories. I do a lot of introducing these days, and maybe the easiest way to keep things brief, but still honor a distinguished speaker, is to resort to the age-old cliche, our speaker needs no introduction. Is it ever as true as tonight? So I'll be very telegraphic so we can get right to it. Michael Pollan is a professor of the practice in Harvard's creative writing program and the Louis K. Chan Lecture at the university. We know him from The Botany of Desire and The Omnivore's Dilemma. A leading voice on nature and food systems, he turned his attention to altered states of consciousness in 2 best-selling and seminal books, How to Change Your Mind, What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence from 2018, and This Is Your Mind on Plants from 2021. Michael, we are so grateful to have you with us, so please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming. Hi, Bruno.
Hey, how's your day been?
Well, you know, we had lunch together. We were scheming one of the programs that may come out of this new gift, which would be a psychedelic film festival. We were meeting with Hayden Gast, and he had some amazing ideas of films I'd never heard of that sound very interesting.
So the way this will work is I'll ask a couple questions to get us going, but we'll be very, very mindful of your hands. We'll try to collect 2 or 3 questions at a time. I'll be your note taker. And then we'll just, keep doing that till midnight? Is that what we do? So I want to open by cutting to some of the language in our publicity materials. Age-old questions about human meaning, spiritual transcendence. So it's a question about psychedelics, the varieties of religious experience, and your current work with religious leaders.
Yeah, sure. So I'm still writing about psychedelics. I'm writing about other things as well, but I just finished a piece for The New Yorker about a really unusual psychedelic experiment conducted at Johns Hopkins and NYU. They've been leading centers for clinical work in psychedelics. They did the key work with people with cancer diagnoses that I wrote about in How to Change Your Mind. And so they're very experienced. They've now dosed hundreds, if not thousands of people as part of their trials. And they had this very peculiar idea, which was to give psychedelics, high doses of psilocybin, to religious professionals in a great many different faiths, I think like 16 different faiths. They did this several years ago. It took a long time to recruit. There were certain faiths that didn't want anything to do with it. I don't think they ever found a Hindu. They did find an imam, which was tough, and a Buddhist priest. And everybody had to be naive, psychedelically naive. So they wanted the first experience. They had a really easy time getting rabbis. They were lining up. The challenge there was finding psychedelically naive rabbis. But they managed. They found 3, I think. Anyway, so I've spent the last couple months interviewing these people about their experiences. And I'd never interviewed clergy before. And it was such an interesting, thoughtful... these are people paid to think about big questions every day. And so it was a fascinating experience. All but one had a divine encounter, variously described. The one who didn't was, surprise, surprise, the Buddhist priest who told me she traveled to a realm beyond concept for which she has no words. So it was a short interview. But it raised all sorts of very interesting questions about the mystical experience and its role in religion, about unmediated direct encounters of individuals with God and how organized religion can deal with that, because it's very disruptive to organized religion, which, usually the divine encounters were sometime in the past and were mediated by a priesthood. And one of the things that really struck me about this is the number of people who came out of this experiment thinking that psychedelics should be incorporated in their church in some ways. That'll be very disruptive. And that it had the power, many of them concluded, to... Now, this is a self-selected group, right? These are, pastors and priests willing to take psychedelics. But they really saw this as a path to revitalizing religion. So it was a very interesting experiment. One of the reasons I wanted to write about it is that most of my work had been about the clinical uses of psychedelics, which I still think are the most important and the most urgent. We have such a mental health crisis in this country right now, exacerbated by COVID and social media. and with rising rates of suicidality and depression and anxiety. And psychedelics, based on the preliminary evidence we have, offers mental health treatment, powerful new tools. So that's like the first priority. But there are other ways in which I think psychedelics are going to re-enter our society. And one of them is through religion, whether it's the current organized religions or new religions that are popping up in incredible numbers. And these are groups that get together and use psychedelics sacramentally. Some of them are very serious. Some of them are not so much. But it's going to be very interesting to follow that. And it's one of the things that I think that our colleagues in the law school will be involved with. Because the current jurisprudence of the Supreme Court around religious freedom is so radical that I think it's going to be very hard for them to rule against some of these churches when they get to that level of the Supreme Court. And there are people right now looking for the right cases to take up. I sort of see this as Samuel Alito's exploding cigar. But we'll see. There's so many interesting stories, and that's one of the reasons that we want to do this kind of work here and do something really different than what every other campus that started a psychedelic center, and there are more than a dozen of them now. They tend to focus on science and therapeutic applications, but the implications of psychedelics go far beyond that.
Tell us more.
Well, I think there's the religious path, and then there's, what people dismissively call the recreational path. I mean, people who use psychedelics for their own reasons. I don't know when recreation got such a negative connotation. It's a beautiful word and process, but there it is. And so I think one of the cultural projects of the next several years will be designing a third container for psychedelics. In other words, we have this medical container. We know how to administer it in a medical context. And I don't know how familiar you are with it, but there's a very regimented process where the patient/volunteer is carefully prepared in advance with several hours of therapy to get to know the guides, the person who will be the facilitator, figure out their intention in having this experience, what problems they want to work on, their fears going forward. And then this person, or two people in the university context, a man and a woman, sits with the patient for the duration, doing and saying very little, but being available and a comforting presence and a protective presence. And if someone gets into trouble, with an encouraging word or hand on the shoulder, or it's funny. It's not funny, but it's one of the rare areas of psychotherapy where touch is allowed. And then after the experience, you come back for what's called an integration session, and that's several hours of trying to make sense of what can be a very confusing experience, and drawing out the narrative of it, and figuring out how to apply the insights gained to your life. So that's kind of the medical container, and it's proven to be very effective. There have been very few adverse events in the university trials. They tend to, there are bad trips, so-called, although when it's in the context, a therapeutic context, a bad trip can actually be a very useful trip, very revealing trip. And so we know that particular container offers some safety and security. The religious container, which has, of course, been around for thousands of years, psychedelics have been used. We have evidence of peyote being used sacramentally, and I use that word vaguely because we don't really know how it was used, from 6,000 years ago. And psilocybin was being used at the time of the conquest. So there's an ancient religious use, and religion broadly defined, because sometimes it would include divination. That was a very common use of magic mushrooms in Mexico, or healing, and the difference between religion and healing was, not as sharp as it is in our culture. But then there's this, well, what about everybody else or anybody else who's interested? I think the importance of a container is without question. I think this is not cannabis. These are much more powerful substances, and if people are using them at a high dose, they really do need a container. And one of the things we've learned is that when people use drugs in a ritualized context, it's a lot safer than when they don't. And this goes even for alcohol. People who drink only with other people or only at night, we have all these rules that protect us to some extent from getting into trouble with these substances. So ritual is a really important part of it. And, there are secular rituals as well as religious ones. So the design of that other container, cultural container, I don't know what we want to call it, recreational container, is cultural work that, remains to be done.
So to stay with another set of secular rituals, what we do at a university, in a way, the bet that we're placing here at Harvard that differs a bit more from a lot of the really important work happening here and elsewhere is that there is something that humanistic, or what we might call humanistic inquiry, can add to clinical investigations. And we might think of the humanities as the science of that which can't be easily measured, right? Mm-hmm. And the religious relationship with this is often at peace with, to quote the Buddhist priest, for which we have no words, right? Yeah. And yet, you stayed a writer, even after
and produced thousands of words about the ineffable, yeah.
So, yeah. So my question is two-part. I mean, it's both your answer provisional, because in a way we're still at a hypothetical stage in terms of what will come out of this at Harvard. But for you as a writer, how have psychedelics changed the way you think? And I also want to ask a question, because it's one that it might not come from the audience, so I want to make sure we get it, which is how your work on this has changed your relationship, not just to writing you do now, but to writing you've done in the past. And we were talking earlier about how your first book, Second Nature, in a way, takes the garden as a mind-altering space.
Yeah, so it's very rare that writers dare read their earlier work. It's just not a good policy from a mental health perspective. And I had published Second Nature in the early 90s and hadn't opened it since then. And but in the early 90s, there were not yet audiobooks. And my publisher wanted to do an audiobook. And I've, in the last few years, have insisted on reading my books. I can't stand hearing someone else do it. And readers don't like it either. I mean, if you're writing in nonfiction in the first person, you really want to hear the author's voice. And I don't mind doing it. But I did mind doing this one. So I read this book I wrote when I was in my, late 20s, early 30s. And I was shocked to find that I have not had a new idea since 1991. And that, you wouldn't know it. It's in germinal form, but there is talk about plants helping to change our consciousness, changing our mood. And this, ended up being a theme that would emerge later. And that, they say that first novels include everything you know. And I think there's some truth to that. And so I was able to find the seeds of almost all subsequent work, even though it ranged as far afield from writing about food and nature and agriculture to psychedelics. But the common thread is my fascination with plants and how they change us, we change them, their biochemical genius. Since plants can't run away, the only way they can defend themselves is chemically. Most of the drugs that we love, including caffeine, are defense chemicals that just so happen in proper doses to do interesting things to our minds. I'm constantly astounded by the fact that the synchronicity of that a plant trying to defend itself against insects creates a chemical compound that just happens to unlock various receptors in our minds. I mean, that's extraordinary. And why is that? And I've, thought a lot about it. And then we have this long-standing desire to change consciousness as a species. And we're not the only one. A lot of animals change consciousness too. Dolphins, somebody recently told me, take pufferfish, which produce a toxin.
Wow. Yeah.
And they'll somehow take a puff off this thing and then pass it to another dolphin. I haven't seen this with my own eyes, but fact-checking needs to be done. But so what is that desire about? I mean, it would seem to be very maladaptive, right? I mean, when you change consciousness, you're more accident-prone, you have less control of yourself, you're more liable to be, preyed upon. A lot can go wrong and does go wrong. So why didn't natural selection edit out the drug takers? It's a really interesting question. And so it made me think that, well, these consciousness-changing plants and fungi are doing something valuable. And the way I conceived of it, and I wrote about this in my third book, Botany and Desire, is that in the same way biological evolution proceeds through a process of mistake-making and mutation, some of which very rarely are useful to the species, I think cultural evolution proceeds the same way, and that there are mutagens in culture, and one of them are drugs, and that every now and then, and now like 99% of the insights and artistic creation done with drugs are probably worthless, but every now and then the encounter of a certain kind of molecule in a certain kind of mind produces something amazing. A scientific breakthrough like PCR. Carrie Mullis invented PCR after an imaginative experience of what the DNA molecule looked like and how it could be reproduced. And there are other scientific examples, and there are tons of artistic examples. So that's one thing I think that drugs have done for us, that they've created new memes. And that's one of the things that would be really interesting to study. I mean, could we conceive of a natural history of the imagination in which drugs played the role of, solar radiation in mutating things? And that's why I'm so excited about this program, because these are the kind of questions that are not getting attention. And I think they have the potential to teach us a lot.
So I'm going to be disciplined and hold on to my other questions and scan the room to see if anyone's ready. I see two. I see, well, more than two, but we'll start with two,
They come.
and then we'll keep it. But I am looking for the mics. Oh, we're waiting on the mics. Okay. Oh, great. Yeah. You never answered the question about your writing now.
Oh, yeah. Has my writing now changed? I'm not sure it has. I don't know. I mean, it's changing all the time, but I don't know that. I think psychedelic experience has changed me. I mean, I did write about my own experiences and how to change your mind. I felt like,
Okay.
In the service of my readers, I needed to do this. And I had an experience that did have lasting effect. I had an experience of kind of total ego dissolution, where my sense, and this is not an uncommon experience, where my ego, my sense of self, just detonated into a cloud of blue Post-it notes that then, came down like snow to the ground, and they pooled, and there was this pool of blue paint on the ground, and that was me. And I was beholding it from this completely new perspective that was not me. It was very objective, totally unemotional. It was fine with what had happened. And it wasn't frightening at all. And what happens when you no longer have an ego is that, egos build walls, they protect you. and there's the subject-object duality, and they do all these, dualistic things. And when that was gone, you merge with something else because there's nothing to separate you. And in my case, it was a piece of music. It was a Bach unaccompanied cello suite played by Yo-Yo Ma, and a very sad piece of music. I forget which one it was. But there was no distinction between me and this piece of music. It wasn't subject-object, and I just kind of merged with it. And at one point, I could feel the bow, Yo-Yo Ma's bow, going over my body, or my body. I mean, the pronouns get all fucked up. And it was a wonderful experience. And it left me with this thought that, I thought my ego was absolutely indispensable. I was identical to it. But in fact, when it died, I didn't die. And it gave me a kind of a little bit more distance on it. Like, I don't have to listen to that voice. There are other voices. And I think that's been useful. I think that's been a useful thing for me.
We have the mic now. Yeah, I saw. Yeah. She can. Let's make it 3. Just I'm seeing many hands, and of course, please try to be brief so we can get to as many questions as possible.
I can also speak up.
Well, it's being
We're trying
recorded.
to record.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's recorded. So there's an emerging body of research about the autistic brain and how it relates to cannabinoid receptors. I am autistic experientially. I feel like I've confirmed this. I seem to react very, very differently from my so-called neurotypical friends with marijuana. I have not been able to find a similar body of research on how the autistic brain interacts with psilocybin specifically, though experientially I have also confirmed it seems very different for me. I'm wondering if you have or would consider diving into that.
So how does it seem different? That's the William James cop-out. There has been some... Oh, you want to collect 3 questions first? Okay. There has been some research done using MDMA, which is not a classical psychedelic, but it's often grouped with the psychedelics. It's ecstasy or Molly. And there was an experiment done at UCLA by a man named Charles Grobe, a psychiatrist. And he used MDMA with people who had autistic people with social anxiety. And the thinking was that MDMA there's a huge release of oxytocin when you take it, which is a bonding hormone, and it facilitates connection and trust between people. And I haven't read the paper, it's been published, but I think they got very positive results. And there's some, thought about using it on younger, these were people in their 20s, I think, and there's some thought about using it on younger people. So yes, it's in the air, and I think there's another study that's in process or about to get started. So thanks for your question.
I'm up here, but we have one question, and then I will bring it further down to the side.
Great.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for being here. It's been said psychedelics may help treat climate anxiety by invoking a deep sense of connection with nature and each other. The hope is that awakening will spur us to action, yet it's not entirely clear, at least to me, what we're working towards. What do you envision society will look like upon resolving climate change? What's the role of psychedelics in realizing this?
Big party.
Big questions, I know. It's Harvard, right? We got to ask the big questions. What's the role of psychedelics in realizing this? And what does sustainable living mean on a fundamental level?
Big questions. So I have heard some of this talk about using psychedelics to help deal with climate anxiety. and there is some very preliminary evidence, and I would be very skeptical of it so far, that using psychedelics, specifically psilocybin, changes people's relationship to the natural world in some marked ways. Now, it's important to understand, so the way they do this is they do a before and after. They give people, this was done at Imperial College, London. They give people psilocybin, and there's a measurement that psychologists have, because they have one for everything, nature connectedness. To what extent do you feel you're part of nature or removed from nature? And nature connectedness scores went up pretty reliably. So that's led many people to think that it could help move the culture in a positive direction. But I think we have to be skeptical, because the kinds of people who participate in these kinds of studies are probably already environmentally inclined. Right. And until you give it to the Koch brothers or, and really see a change, I don't think we should count on it. It could push people in the other direction if they were inclined that way. This is also something that we need to study, and we could study here now with good social science methods. There are these ideas that psychedelics change people in a political, environmental, social way, and this has been, Timothy Leary believed this. Many people believe it. There's another theory that has been called unspecific mental amplifiers, and that set and setting, which is Leary's concept, set and setting is so influential that you can kind of load the dice and push people with the right set of expectations and setting and everything in whichever direction you want. Or it may be that people will just kind of underscore beliefs they already have. I've had some very profound experiences of the natural world on psilocybin, but I've been interested in plants my whole life. To discover that the plants in my garden are conscious, which I hadn't quite suspected, was not as big news as if I were a coal company executive. So, to be determined. In terms of helping, I do see some value, though, in helping the heroes who are fighting the good fight on climate and are getting discouraged. And in the same way, I interviewed these clergy who had their faith renewed by this experience. It could be that just at a therapeutic level, we need to support these people as much as we can, and maybe that would be an interesting trial to do. To take some environmental activists who are, as they often become really despondent and discouraged, and see if it couldn't renew their commitment and conviction. That would be a good place to start. But this general idea of getting a better understanding on how psychedelics change people, not in the psychological therapeutic sense, but in their attitudes, I think is really important work to do. And I really don't know how it'll come out, but I think it would be really interesting to do.
Let's do 3 this time.
Okay. You help me remember.
Thanks for being here. I was just wondering if you could talk about the relationship between psychosis and psychedelics.
Okay.
So that's one.
That's easy to remember.
Yeah.
We're going to take 3 questions and then mush them together.
Or maybe 30, I see. There's a lot. Yeah.
You have a hard job.
Yeah. We should have had more mics.
We have some.
Yeah, let's do 3. I can pass it this way if you want.
Okay.
We have one.
Start here and then we'll.
Hi, I'm Eliza. Thank you so much for being here. Our kind of shared question is, so you spoke about the third container, the recreational container, and how it's going to be cultural work to build and articulate that container. And I'm interested in, informed by both your personal experiences and maybe what you would describe as somewhat approximating that container as opposed to the other two, and your research and all the people you've talked to, what specific ritual elements or regulations or facets of that container you think either will naturally or really specifically should be part of that.
Okay.
Great. Here. I know you had one early on, so. Yeah, I know it's
Hi, I'm Mia. Thank you so much for being here. You kind of briefly touched on how altered states of consciousness have impacted your writing. I know there's a long history of writers kind of engaging with different plants that can alter consciousness. I mean, thinking about alcohol, Aldous Huxley writing Doors of Perception on an acid trip. I'm wondering if you view psychedelics as an avenue toward like creative freedom within the writer community, and if that would exist in a container, like you mentioned earlier, alongside the likes of divine experience or recreation.
Okay, I'm going to do the psychosis first. So when psychedelics were first discovered in the West in the 50s, they were called psychotomimetics because the psychiatrists who were working with them, this is right after Albert Hofmann discovered or invented LSD in 38 or 43. From what they'd heard, it looked a lot like psychosis. There was depersonalization, like I was describing, ego dissolution. There was dissociation. There were hallucinations. There were voices that people heard. It sure looked like psychosis. But then some of the psychiatrists who were working with the substance took the drugs themselves, specifically two in Saskatchewan, Humphrey Osmond and Abram Hoffer. And they were like, this is nothing like psychosis. This feels too good. And so that began this dialogue, actually, between Aldous Huxley, who you just mentioned, and the psychiatrist, Humphrey Osmond, about we need a new name. Psychotomimetics doesn't work. And so they went back and forth. And I love this dialogue. Do you have it? Can you read it?
To fathom hell or go angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic.
And it wasn't Huxley who came up with the winning entry. It was the psychiatrist. And the reason I love this, and that became the word psychedelic, which was coined in 57. Most of us think the word is a 60s artifact, but it's a 50s artifact. And I love that because one of the things that's really interesting and special about psychedelics and the study of consciousness more broadly is that there's a real dialogue between the humanities and the sciences. Right. Yeah. In consciousness, I mean, I've been writing about this, and the philosophers and the scientists really feed off each other and have lots of contact, and they go to the same conferences. And where else does this happen? And it's because we don't know anything about consciousness, and even the scientists are willing to take some help, which isn't always the case. So anyway, going back to this point about psychosis, though, one of the risks of psychedelics is that people have psychotic breaks every now and then. And it's really important to understand that it is a momentous thing to take a psychedelic for the first time at a high dose. We don't understand that much about this. These are often the first psychotic break of someone in their, say, early 20s. The thinking has been that these are people who were going to enter schizophrenia because when the public started using psychedelics in large numbers, there was no increase in schizophrenia. So it may have been a triggering event, and something was going to happen to trigger it. But it's important to know some people end up in the psych ward and with effects that can be transient, but sometimes they can last a long time. So there is a connection between psychedelics and psychosis that we have to be frank about. I mean, in general, the risks of the classical psychedelics, which I looked into because I was a late bloomer here, and was not a risk-taking 20-year-old. And I looked closely at the risks, and I was really surprised at what I found. If you're talking about psilocybin, LSD, and DMT, which is the psychedelic in ayahuasca, although it's also used by itself, there is no lethal dose. That's astonishing. There are very few drugs that have no lethal dose. You have drugs in your medicine cabinet, like Tylenol, and the lethal dose is like 20 pills. So that was one thing. And the other is that they are not habit forming. People don't get addicted to psychedelics. And this has been shown in the classic animal experiment where you create an apparatus that feeds into the veins of mice or rats, and they can press a lever and take cocaine, heroin, and they'll use that until they're addicted and dead in the case of the cocaine. And but if you put LSD in that setup, they'll do it once and never again. So, I mean, you can imagine for animals, it's a confusing experience. But there is this psychological risk. So if someone has any risk, has a first order or even second order relative with schizophrenia, they will not let you participate in the university trials. So it's something to be aware of. So of course I forgot the other questions.
Yeah, I took notes. I'll just stress back to the term psychedelic being coined. It was a scientist writing poetry.
Yeah, I know.
So it was as much a solution to a rhyme as a solution to a scientific problem.
It's true.
It's a lot to be said for those exchanges.
And what was Huxley's? Do you remember Huxley's word that he came up with in that exchange?
Yeah, it was not nearly as poetic. Yeah, it was the writer trying to sound like a scientist. So one of the questions is loosely connected to this, creative freedom. And the other was
the container.
Yeah, the specifics about what a cultural container might,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think first of all, and then we're talking about people using a fairly high dose, right? Not, what's called a museum dose of psilocybin, where everything is just aestheticized. And first, that there be somebody in the room who's not using. Who is your sitter. I think that's really important. I think some kind of ritual is probably a good idea, and I don't know what it is. I mean, but that's kind of exciting to create new rituals. That there be some, somebody has access to 911 or could deal with an emergency. That you be in a safe place. I mean, people, well, you have different feelings about this, but that urban experiences aren't optimal. But Bruno can, raise questions about that. I mean, we have this pastoral idea attached to psychedelics, but there might be an urban mode that we haven't explored.
Yeah, I mean, that's a research question that I mentioned. I'm interested in. Do bad trips in the U.S. tend to be more urban, and does that say something about culture rather than psychedelics? Right?
Well, I think it has to do with being around lots of people who are not using psychedelics can be a little disturbing, and the amount of social information that is available to you in the city could be disturbing. So just whatever is appealing to you, paying a lot of attention to set and setting. I mean, those concepts, that really was Leary's contribution. To develop this idea that I mean, it's true to some extent with all psychoactive substances. It's true with coffee, that the setting in which you have it influences, and your mindset influences what happens. But it's to an order of magnitude greater with psychedelics. It's just weird how much the experience is shaped by the environment and your mindset as you go into the experience. So any container that really attends to that, I think, is valuable.
Creative freedom was the third question.
How did that go?
Do you want to?
Oh yeah, sorry. I guess
3 questions is like too much for me.
I know.
Sorry.
I was just wondering what your experience was, kind of being in an altered state of consciousness as a writer, and if you foresee that influencing almost this subset of writers who use psychedelics to like access this creative freedom, and how
Yeah.
that would influence either genre or the writing process, or just kind of how you see that impacting literature in any way?
Yeah, that's a great question, research question. I mean, we have a history of writers writing about their experiences, from Henry Miller to Quincy to Aldous Huxley. I mean, Doors of Perception remains one of the great books on this subject. To the extent that that book has shaped, I mean, going back to Set and Setting, that book has shaped the kinds of experiences people have. I know things happened in my experience that would not have happened had I not read that book. The kind of Easternizing or Orientalizing of psychedelic experience, it's all Huxley. So separating out those threads of influence, I think, would be really interesting. But there is a history of scientific work, sketchy but interesting, about creativity in psychedelics. And there is an experiment that was done in the 70s that needs to be redone with more rigorous controls. Jim Fadiman is a psychologist. He was at Stanford, and in the early 70s, when you could still do legal research, he wanted to study creativity in LSD, and he got together a group of people, all of whom were blocked in their creative work. There was an architect, there was a writer, there was a painter, there were all different things, and he gave them 100 micrograms of LSD, which is not a huge dose, but it's enough to for someone to have a pretty serious trip. And he let them kind of sprawl on the ground and hallucinate for a little while, and then he said, "Go to your desks." And they all went to their work tables and they got to work on their projects. And several of them, I think a majority, reported breakthroughs. Now, this is a really badly done study. There is no control, self-reports on this. And measuring creativity is very hard. I think psychologists use a divergent thinking metric. But there's some new metrics, apparently. So that's a study I would love to see done. I mean, we have lots of people who testified to the value it's had for them in terms of work, and sometimes, breakthroughs of one kind or another. But how often that happens, we don't really know. So, as a writer writing about this, I found it was really fun. In the book, I have a series of experiences on different substances in different settings. And I was really nervous about sitting down to write, because, if you've read like trip reports online, they're not great works of literature. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. And, William James had famously, when he laid out the criteria of the mystical experience, one was ineffability. That this is beyond, like the Buddhist priest I described, or monk, this is beyond words and concepts. So I was very nervous about writing about it. In the event, though, it was the most fun I've had as a nonfiction writer, because it was very close to fiction. And I sort of found a way to do it, which involved turning to the audience at various times, like acknowledging how crazy something sounds, and then going back into the narrative and then stepping out. It was sort of breaking the fourth wall at various times, and that allowed me to regain the trust of the reader, and have a sober connection with the reader. But in the end, it was so enjoyable to write, because I was recording what was going through my mind that wasn't necessarily, it was not fact checkable. And I imagine it was like, I've never written fiction, but I imagine it was a lot like what fiction writers do, which is they have a waking dream or a fantasy, and they're describing the products of their own imagination. And I got to do that. So it ended up being great fun. I mean, you can decide if it worked, but I had a good time.
New round?
Yeah.
Should we take 7 or 8 this time? Where's the mic? There it is. all the hands seem to migrate away.
There, yeah,
from
we got
the
two
mic.
right up here.
Hi. Oh, shoot. I'm really curious if you have any thoughts about as the movement grows and it's in the middle of this renaissance, which is really incredible, how to increase the accessibility of psychedelics across different containers. I think recreational will require a substantial policy and regulatory changes. But even as psychedelic-assisted therapy grows, it's still at quite a prohibitively high cost across a lot of different substance types. So what are some opportunities, both in the near term and over the long term, to actually increase the accessibility and make it more affordable? I'm curious.
Okay, I'm going to answer that one before you take any more. Okay. Before I forget. So this is why the medical container is so important. And this is why the effort to get the FDA to approve these drugs, which is underway. You know, MDMA, the FDA is now deliberating. They have all their phase 3 data that they need, and it's very positive. And the odds are that they're going to approve MDMA within a year. And psilocybin is a couple years behind, probably. It'll be approved for depression. Presumably, once it's approved and we have good evidence it works, it'll be covered by insurance. And that is the way you reach the most people with something that, yes, is expensive. I mean, this is happening with ketamine now, which is covered by insurance in many cases. So that's one way you get accessibility. I mean, if you're, you know, but it's important to understand. So people worry about medicalization, like, you know, big pharma is going to control psychedelics. Psychedelics can be very hard to control. It's really not hard to grow mushrooms. There are kits you can get online legally, and there's spores you can get online also legally, different companies. And they're, you know, they cost pennies. So if people are willing to organize themselves into groups, you know, to guide one another or learn, you know, learn how to guide. There are now programs where you can learn how to guide. That should be very accessible. But yes, right now, a guided experience in the underground is thousands of dollars. It's expensive. And that has to do with supply and demand, I think. So thanks for your question.
Yeah, I'm here. Here.
Hi.
Something that caught my attention when I was living in Colombia, and I was in some places where people were doing ayahuasca, was that most of the people were either from America, like the United States, or from Europe. And then I wonder if you have any thought on whether the use of psychedelics can lead to any sort of social division, either between these countries and other countries, or political groups, or in general, social divisions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, they were divisive in the 60s. There was a lot of political divisiveness around psychedelics. They were associated with the counterculture and the anti-war movement. Certainly, President Nixon believed that they were fueling the anti-war movement, and he may well have been right. That's one of the reasons they were made illegal. So I think if you have part of the culture, you know, engaging in a certain practice that's transformative and another part not, there is the potential for division. There's also the phenomenon of psychedelic tourism, which is growing rapidly, and it's people going to South America or the Caribbean or Central America, going to retreat centers or going to, you know, much more remote places to work with shamans. And there have been some really bad stories that have come out of that. You know, there are phony shamans out there who take advantage of people, and they're, you know, I've heard some, you know, terrible stories. I mean, people need to be careful. And I haven't done any trips like that. I mean, I haven't gone to South America to use ayahuasca or anything, but you can imagine that a flood of gringo money into some of these communities is pretty destabilizing, and that will produce lots of charlatans. So I think that could be divisive too.
Do you have anything to say on Sabina? That story.
Maria Sabina. Yeah. So it is a cautionary tale. So psilocybin was unknown in the West for 500 years. I mentioned that the conquest, when the conquistadors came to Mexico, they found people practicing rites using these mushrooms, and they call them Teonahuan. Do you remember what the word is? Teohuanacatl. Anyway, it's the Quechua word for flesh of the gods. So it was exactly like the Christian sacrament, which is also, of course, flesh of the God, and or of Christ. And this was very upsetting to the Catholic Church because this native sacrament, you really did meet God. You didn't just, it wasn't metaphorical, it wasn't symbolic, it was the real deal. It was a more powerful sacrament, or it seemed that way to them. So they crushed it and drove the mushroom cults, and of course, any religion you don't approve of, you call a cult, underground. And but it survived for 500 years underground. And then Gordon Wasson is a wonderful story. He was a banker at J.P. Morgan Chase. It was J.P. Morgan then. And he is an amateur mycologist. He married a Russian woman who turned him onto mushrooms. I mean, all kinds, culinary mushrooms. And he had heard rumors, including from Richard Evans Schultes, that the mushroom cults were alive and well in Oaxaca, in the mountains of Oaxaca. And he made a series of expeditions, and he finally, in 1955 or 56, found a curandera, or healer, in a town way up in the mountains. It was like a 6-day ride by burro. And this is a banker, right, making this trek. And he persuades her to do a ceremony, which they do in the basement of her house. And by the way, the notebook describing this experience is right here in the Horticultural Library. And you could put on the white gloves and go through it. It's really cool. And so he had this experience. He comes back. He's very close to Henry Luce and persuades him to run a big story in Life magazine, like 15 pages, with photographs and illustrations and pictures of the mushrooms. And this is the introduction to a lot of Americans of psychedelics, and certainly of psilocybin. But it was such a phenomenon, and he was on television talking about it, that for the next 15 years, people descended on this little town. And celebrities, I think Mick Jagger went, and Bob Dylan, and there was this flood of money. And she became despised by her neighbors for having ruined their town. And in fact, somebody burned down her house. It's a really sad story. And, you know, it's just kind of the power of the West when it descends on a little place, what it can do. So she's kind of a hero of the psychedelic movement. And her children and grandchildren, apparently, are still curanderas, and they're still working with psilocybin, and people still go down there. I mean, it's not quite the flood it was at one point. But yeah, it was a really tragic story. And I think she came to regret giving Gordon Wasson that experience. But anyway, that notebook is really great to watch. He has little drawings of the room, and you know watch his handwriting deteriorate every time you turn the page until you can't make sense of it.
Hi. Are you actively looking to include Indigenous people in your research project here to avoid this becoming another project of colonial extraction? And furthermore, how do we really respect the integrity of Indigenous sacred plant medicine?
Yeah, that's a really important issue in the psychedelic community. There's a lot of conversation about it. In fact, even the corporations, it may just be lip service, but they talk about their debt to Indigenous communities. And a lot of psychedelics were discovered by Indigenous communities. That doesn't go for LSD. LSD, I mean, it's not the whole tradition, and there's some people who kind of like, you know, put it all in the same basket, that this is an Indigenous practice taken over by the West. In some cases, peyote for sure, ayahuasca for sure. But then there's also a Western chemistry tradition. Sasha Shulgin, invented some psychedelics. He was a great chemist at Berkeley. And LSD obviously came up through a whole other path. But there's a lot of interest in reciprocity around indigenous peoples. And there's also the fact that we have a lot to learn from them. I mean, people who've been using these drugs safely and productively for hundreds of thousands of years have something to teach us. I think part of the problem in the 60s was there was insufficient recognition of indigenous practice. And so in the 60s, these powerful substances arrive in our culture and they don't have an instruction manual. And people did lots of stupid things. And, they took them under, odd circumstances. People were, putting it in the punch bowl at parties. The idea of dosing people without their permission seemed kind of cool. I mean, what could be more cruel? And had we not been so arrogant and gave a little attention to the set and setting of these substances in indigenous cultures, and I'm not talking about white people going into teepees and having, imitation peyote ceremonies, but I'm talking about looking at the structure of those ceremonies and what would be appropriate in our culture and what wouldn't be. And but I think there's a reservoir of wisdom there that, going back to this project of creating cultural containers, and I realize you have to be alert to cultural appropriation, but there's a lot we could learn. So yes, I mean I'm hoping that. So this is very undirected. Bruno mentioned this humanities fellowship, and we don't know what people are going to come forward with. We're doing it. We're kind of putting chum in the water to see who comes up and bites. We're hoping to surface students, scholars, groups who have interesting ideas. And our hunch is that there are people on this campus, given the opportunity, and on the Berkeley campus as well, because it's a joint program, that will have interesting things that they want to work on, and we want to facilitate it. But we're not looking, I have my dreams, I mentioned a few of the projects I'd love to see happen, but that's not how it's going to work. We're not going to, direct people to study this or that. We're going to see what they want to do. And hopefully there will be ideas around indigenous issues. Thanks.
This time, let's do 3.
Okay, yeah. 3.
Out of time. So.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how, and this might go back to the conversation about a cultural container that we develop as a society for the use of these psychedelic drugs, how we discuss the use of these drugs with young and developing minds. I definitely went to a school where the instruction around drugs was no, never, don't have them, your life will be ruined. And sort of, again, touching on another question, some of the indigenous practices around some of these drugs that invoke psychedelic experiences were had with young developing minds. They were sort of this awakening into one's life. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that, and if you know about any schools that are changing their practices about how they talk about psychedelic drugs, or if you have opinions about how we should change.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll do my best to remember it.
Let's see. Go ahead and take it.
Okay. Yeah. Bruno's going to let me answer. The whole issue of drug education is really complex. I think the first mistake we make is lumping all drugs together. They're really, really different substances with different risks and different benefits. And the just say no, dare approach put them all in the basket of, if it's illegal, it's going to fry your brain. This Is Your Mind on Plants was a play on the famous ad, This Is Your Brain on Drugs. And in other cultures, yes, psychedelics are often used on adolescents. It's a rite of passage. I mean, there's another really important ritual. In some cultures, it's a rite of passage. My instinct, which is not informed, is that children shouldn't be using psychedelics. I remember saying to at a conference, I was asked a question like this, that it seems to me that a substance that completely dissolves your ego, you should stay away from until you have an ego to dissolve. Do you know what I mean? That you were fully developed. And my own instinct, as someone who didn't use psychedelics really till I was in my late 50s, is that it's more valuable the older you are. But that's not informed either. Or it's only informed by my personal experience. One of the things that's interesting about the FDA sanctioned research is, as soon as MDMA is approved for the treatment of trauma in adults, MAPS, the organization that did all that research, will be required to test it on adolescents. And that's just standard FDA policy. If a drug works for adults, why withhold it from children? And we don't withhold SSRIs or ADHD medicine. And then after adolescence, they'll go to a younger group, and MAPS will be required to do that work. I assume the same thing will happen when and if psilocybin is approved for depression, and that it will then be trialed on adolescents and perhaps people younger than that. I mean, certainly in the case of trauma, we have so many children struggling with trauma. So that's going to kind of mess with our minds about how we think about drugs in young people, especially if it proves really successful. By the time I got involved in this, my son was already off to college or older than that. And so it was a pretty easy conversation to have about what I was up to and what he was up to. But had he been 5 or 10 years younger, I really don't know how I would handle it, honestly. I just don't have an answer. I haven't thought about that dialogue. Kids are getting a message in school that's sometimes really not helpful. So it's up to parents to give a saner message. But in many cases, you're talking about illegal substances, and that has to figure in. So it's not simple, and I won't pretend to have the answers on that question.
Hey, my name is Vlad, and I have really enjoyed hearing and reading your recollections of your personal trips. But you said how that experience can be so ineffable, and from my personal experience, trying to verbalize it also can interfere with the experience itself. Yeah. So how do you go about recording what's happening in your mind, and what's your approach to integrating that in your own life?
So I initially...
Should be hold and do another round.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because the mic is close.
Hold that thought.
This time, the mic is close, so we'll do two more.
Thanks very much. You mentioned about the problems of selection bias in medical trials. I guess there are also problems with placebo and blinding. And given that these are not harmless things, I mean, particularly with ketamine, for example, do you think that these are major problems, and how do you think that they could be resolved?
Okay.
One more?
Yeah, okay. You write this down?
I did not.
I feel like I'm doing a memory drill.
I'm just wondering how all this work that's being done now on psychedelics intersects or doesn't intersect with the work that's being done on the brain and consciousness from a more, strictly medical, scientific point of view.
Great questions. 3 great questions. Which one should I do first? Yes. So I've been writing on consciousness, and one of the things that's really struck me is how almost to a person, the consciousness researchers I'm interviewing are very interested in psychedelics and have psychedelic experience in their past or their recent past. Same with the neuroscientists working on it. So there's a lot of interest. And I think that psychedelics, and this is why I think doing some basic science on psychedelics is really important, and we are doing that at the Psychedelic Center at Berkeley. They have interesting things to teach us about human consciousness. I'll give you an example. There's a couple theories about how psychedelics work in the brain. I talk about one in the book, but there are a couple that have come out since. And one is that it sheds light on what is now generally known as the predictive processing or predictive coding model of consciousness or perception, which is that the brain does not simply take in information through the senses and construct a picture of the reality. It has beliefs, priors, that basically dictate what we see based on expectation. Last time you were in a hall like this, something like this, and your senses are only there to correct the mistakes. And this is a very efficient way to do perception. And this is widely accepted right now in neuroscience. And the thinking is that what psychedelics do is, so there's a hierarchy of beliefs, and there are higher order beliefs that are more cultural or more conscious, and then there are these other ones along the way, like a crooked stick on the ground is a snake, or a boulder might be a bear. And so what psychedelics seem to do is relax the higher order beliefs. And they may be beliefs about yourself, beliefs that contribute to depression or anxiety. And those beliefs are softened or relaxed, allowing new patterns and new beliefs to form. So that's kind of interesting. Another really interesting model, there's a scientist named Gul Dolan who has done research suggesting that psychedelics reopen what are called critical periods in human development. So the humans and animals go through these, in development, go through these periods. Famously, you know about between the ages of, 2 and 4, you can learn languages like this. It's a critical period for language. In adolescence, there's a critical period for sociality where you can learn social information very quickly and you're really interested in it. And there's a bunch of others. There's a critical period after stroke where if you get intensive physical therapy, I think it's like 6 weeks, you can make a lot of progress. After that, it closes. And we don't know why these periods close, except if you were constantly learning, there would be another set of problems. So she did this experiment first with octopuses, interestingly enough. And octopuses are notoriously solitary creatures. After they're mature, they don't want to be with any other octopuses. They just go under their rock, and I don't know how they reproduce. She found that if she gave them MDMA, this reopened their critical period. No, not even just in the acute phase, but for a couple weeks after. And she would give them a choice of 2 chambers, one with other octopuses they could hang out with, and the other where they could be by themselves. And for the first time, they chose to hang with the other octopuses. And she's since done this with rats and mice, and she's done all the different psychedelic compounds. And they all have this effect. They reopen critical periods of social reward learning. Now, that has implications for a lot of things. It's going to be tested on stroke now to see if you could extend that period and do intensive physical work with people. And some people believe, going back to your question about autism, that autism may be a premature closing of a critical period that could be reopened. That's still pretty speculative, but intriguing. So these are some of the sort of ideas about consciousness, perception, development that psychedelics may help us to understand. And it's really exciting research. So, all right, what was another question? Did you write it down?
Tensions, ineffability language, and then the controls.
Oh, yeah, so how do you keep, yeah. So I thought when I started this and was having these experiences, I'd do what I always do, and I bring my notebook and jot down some notes. It's like, forget it. I could not take notes and do these experiences. So what I did instead was, the night after an experience, I would force myself, because I was often really tired, to write a very long account of everything that happened. And it was, one of the things that's striking about psychedelic experience, it's not like dreams, which, are constantly being, pulled by this undertow into your unconscious. You remember things really clearly, and for a long time. I mean, I've talked to people who can tell me in detail about psychedelic experiences 20 years ago. So I would do that, and I would also, the most important integration thing for me was to tell my wife, Judith, what had happened. And there's this very interesting process of narrativizing that happens, because lots of things happen at once. It's very inchoate and chaotic, but our need to turn that massive material into a story, into a narrative, is really strong and necessary to making sense of it. So, and since Judith knows me really well, she could help me connect the dots about, well, maybe this had to do with that in your life, or this. So that was incredibly valuable and helped when it came time to write about this experience, because in the immediate aftermath, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And of course, there's a process of editing. I probably left out 70% of what happened during these trips. Okay, third question.
Blinding and placebo.
Oh, yeah. So there are real challenges to doing this research well. And they've played around with different placebos. They'll use something like Ritalin, which gives, remember, the people in these trials are often naive. They haven't used psychedelics before, so they don't know exactly what to expect. And so they'll use something like Ritalin or the B vitamin that gives you this kind of flush. Or they'll use a tiny dose of psilocybin and call that a placebo. It's not great. It's very hard, and it's very hard to blind it, because usually people and their guides can tell that, oh, I think I got the psilocybin. But people have been fooled. People have been fooled and thought that they got it or didn't get it. And there is this phenomenon of dud trips. Some people just don't respond. And so that kind of has fooled the guides a few times. But perfecting the methods is important. The FDA basically told the researchers on the clinical trials, we understand the problem, don't worry about it, that they'll accept these trials even though the blinding is not very good. Thanks, good question.
I think we only have time for one more round. So where's the mic? There it is.
Hello, thank you so much for tonight. I would like to understand a bit more about set. I know that you talked about set and setting, and I believe that setting is something that we all understand. We want safety, we want to be comfortable, we want to have someone to assist us. But the set is quite puzzling, because we are working with people who have depression, who have PTSDs, and those are not ideal sets when we look at it from a regular life perspective. So I would like to hear a bit more on that topic from you. Thank you.
Yeah, so in getting, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's a great question. I understand your temptation.
Set and setting. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm writing it down.
It's a great question. Set part of setting.
Question 2.
I see. Yeah, this one right there. Yeah, set 2.
This is a very brief question. I'm just wondering if there's also any studies that you know of going on with psychedelics and dementia and just the aging brain, and if there's been thoughts about, breakthrough on that, rather than the drugs that they've been.
Yeah, great question. Okay, third and last question.
The clustering thing is very useful when you get bad questions, but they've all been so
Yes,
great.
they have been all good. What happened? Oh,
Should you add a fourth?
I have a short one. Like you do.
That's very generous.
Yeah. Mine's just about kind of what you see as the future, and with psychedelics and ibogaine is something I've heard a lot about, and with like opiates, and that's another drug that I haven't heard much about in terms of the setting and the use to get, that addiction is such a prevalent thing.
Yeah.
So that's
great question.
Let's take
I'm going to go in reverse order and answer that question first. So there is research going on to look at how psychedelics could be used to help people get off of opiates. And a lot of people have trouble with that idea of using one drug to get off of another, but it does happen, and we do it in other cases. And the drug that's gotten the most attention, or is beginning to get a lot of attention, is ibogaine. This is a psychedelic that comes from the root of a shrub that grows in Gabon, and maybe other places in Africa. But and it's a really scary psychedelic. It's like 36-hour trip. It has some toxicity, so you have to be on a heart monitor while you're doing it. But it not only gives you a powerful psychedelic experience, allowing you to relearn and reset your brain, it cuts out the cravings for opiates at the same time. So it's proved very useful in the treatment of opiate addiction. There is a study about to be published from Stanford of ibogaine, which I'm told has very encouraging results. It's not a perfect study because the FDA won't let you give it to people yet. So they did before and after with a group of vets, I think SEAL Team 6 people who had their brains scanned and then went down to Mexico and had it in a clinic there, and then came back and had their brains scanned again. And apparently the results are really dramatic. There are 2 documentaries on ibogaine coming out, so I think you'll be hearing a lot about it. I have no interest in going near it. And then there is a trial to see if psilocybin could also help break opiate addiction. It has proven its value in breaking cigarette addiction, especially dramatically, at Johns Hopkins, and alcohol addiction at NYU, and cocaine addiction at the University of Alabama.
The role of psychedelics in Alcoholics Anonymous is another historical question.
Yes.
It seems.
Yeah.
But
okay. We'll save that for next time.
Dementia and SET.
So, dementia. So, I have 2 things to say about that. It won't take very long, but there is a trial giving psychedelics to people who have just gotten an Alzheimer's diagnosis. In the same way, they think it will help, as it did with the cancer patients, relieving their anxiety and fear and helping them kind of reconceptualize what this diagnosis means for their lives. So it's not a treatment. It's a psychological intervention. There is some interesting evidence, and this is a whole other realm of research that's just starting, about the physiological impact of psychedelics. There is evidence that they promote neurogenesis, regrowth of axons in neurons, that they're potent anti-inflammatory agents, and that, one of the theories of Alzheimer's is it's an inflammatory disease. So that's the next chapter of medical research, is looking at the physiological impact of psychedelics. And I know of a couple teams who are working on that and a couple companies that are working on that. So what was the first question?
SET.
SET and setting, right, up there.
The SET part of setting.
SET part. But there's the initial session before you embark on your trip, there's a lot of attention paid to how you're going to navigate this strange territory you're about to enter. And they have what's called, and I'm thinking of Johns Hopkins now, but it's probably similar at other places. They have the most experience. They have something called flight instructions that they give people. And it consists of advice on what to do when scary things happen. And one is, if you see a door, open it. If you see a staircase, climb it. If you see a window, open it. If you see a monster, do not try to run away. Step right up to it and say, what are you doing in my mind? What do you have to teach me? It's essentially, the advice is, and the proper set for many people is to surrender to whatever is happening. And that the really anxious, scary things that happen to people on psychedelics, many of the therapists believe result from fighting what's going on in your mind. Because, if your ego's dissolving and you fight to keep it together, you're going to get really anxious and you're not going to succeed. So they have advice like surrender, in and through. And if some big animal is going to eat you, let it. And it's kind of like, so that's the set. And they use that for everybody. And, I think it's good advice. So I think we should leave it there. Thank you. What great questions. Thanks. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you. Thank you very much.